And already I've kind of gone deeper than I really wanted to while we're discussing the basics. So what I'm going to do is go to Preferences, Initialize ZBrush. And now I'm going to have you guys kind of follow along just to kind of get used to not only the interface but also navigating and manipulating objects in ZBrush. So what I'm going to do is turn on my Wacom tablet here. And I would suggest getting a Wacom tablet because ZBrush is a very sculptural program and it's nice to kind of get in here and move around with your Wacom. And I would have had to restart ZBrush just to make sure we're starting fresh. So the first thing I'm going to do is, we're not going to mess with lightbox anymore. We've kind of gone over the basics of lightbox. So I'm going to hit the comma key, or you can hit hide up here to kind of get rid of the lightbox. And you can, of course, toggle it back on if you want to, just hitting comma. And so now we've got a document. So the first thing you're going to want to do is probably do this in ZBrush. And you're going to be like, well, that's okay, I guess. I don't know what I'm doing, though. Basically, what you have selected in your tool menu is a simple brush. Now, we're not going to get into a whole bunch of 2.5D stuff yet in the document window, but there's a lot of cool stuff you can do there. We're going to start with modeling. So in order to model in ZBrush, you're probably going to want to start, at least at the very beginning, with a primitive. So this is actually a brush, a 2.5D brush. If you click on that icon, you're actually going to open up a huge menu of, here's your quick picks, here's the stuff that you've probably used recently, here's 3D meshes, which these are just basic initialized meshes, which we'll get into in a second, and Z-spheres, which is really important. And then these are your 2.5D brushes and a couple of 2.5D tools in here, like the mRGB Z-grabber. So we're going to start with 3D meshes. Just like in your quick pick over here, you've also got a cylinder and a polymesh, but I'm going to go ahead and click this tool menu. And now, this tool menu isn't the simple brush. See how this is the big square tool menu? That doesn't mean that's the simple brush tool. That just means in the big tool palette, you have the simple brush selected. And by default in ZBrush, you will have that selected. Your simple brush is actually down here. And that'll make more sense when we get over here to the difference between like this big brush palette and then, or I'm sorry, the material palette and different materials that you've chosen and recently. And same thing as the big brush palette and then brushes that you've used recently. So we've made a mess on our document. And again, our document is basically just our viewport. So I'm going to hit Control N, and that's going to clear our canvas for us. And now we're going to start with a primitive. So I'm going to click on this tool palette right here, and I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to get a whole array of things I can choose. Let's start simple. Let's start with a sphere. So I'm going to take this sphere, and I'm going to click it. Now I have a sphere selected in my tool palette, so I know in my document if I click and drag, I'm going to click and drag a sphere which I selected out of my tool palette. And if I keep clicking and dragging, I'm going to keep clicking and dragging more spheres, which again is kind of cool, but not really all that useful. So there's one more thing we need to do before we can start having a little bit more fun in 3D with ZBrush, and that is going into edit mode. So now if I hit Control N again, clear my canvas, and if you can get over this initial hump, these things I'm showing you, documents, tools, projects, if you can understand that, then the stuff I show you in the first 10 minutes of ZBrush, you've got about 50% of ZBrush figured out. The rest of it it's all downhill from here. So, stick with me. We've got a tool selected. It's a primitive, it's a sphere, and I'm going to drag it out of my document, and now I want to edit this thing. You're going to see that by default I have draw selected. Now there's going to be draw, move, scale, and rotate, but right now I'm interested in edit. Now if I hover over this menu right here, you're going to see edit object, and it's got T. That means the hotkey for that is T. And just like when we were over the quick save, if you hover over that, you're going to see a hotkey is 9. You're going to see hotkeys every once in a while as you roll over things. So anything you roll over in the interface will give you a little bit more information about that, like move is W, scale is E. These are the hotkeys. As well as if you hold down Control, that'll give you even more information on that. So the entire ZBrush interface is actually just a big help menu. So as you go and you want to learn more about these things that we're talking about, you can always hover over it and get the name of it at least and the hotkey, and then you can hold down Control, and that'll actually give you a lot more information on that specific thing. Not all the time, but a lot of the times, especially for the basic stuff, you'll see that that's the case. So we have a sphere on our document, and like I said before, if we keep dragging, we're just going to keep dragging the same sphere, and that's not fun. So Control N, drag out your object. Now I want to edit this object in 3D. So one thing I need to do, let's go over here and click Edit. So the shortcut for edit is T. So if you drag out your object and then hit T, you are now in edit mode. So now what does that mean? That means if you click and drag in your document again, you're not going to drag another version of the sphere out. You're actually going to rotate your object. Now, because this is a sphere, it's kind of hard to see it's rotating. I don't know about the resolution of the video on your screen right now, but in order to kind of see this being edited, I'm going to go over here and turn on polyframe. And now, so this is the polyframe button over here. If you let go and kind of hover, it's going to see Shift F is the hotkey, and if you hold down Control, some more information about the polyframe. Basically, these are the wireframes that make up my object, and as we get into a little bit more of the box modeling aspects of ZBrush, we'll get more into what these components mean. But for now, you can kind of see what this object is made of, and basically it's two polarized ends and a bunch of polygons. So it's an okay object to start sculpting on. Now, before we start sculpting, we have to do a few more things because this is an initialize primitive object. So when we're in here, all of these 3D meshes in here are primitives, 3D primitives. So we've got our 3D primitive sphere on here. And because it's a primitive, we can actually go, so here's our tool menu, and we can, of course, scroll up and down. One thing, while it's a primitive, and I'm going to explain what that means in just a second, you can go down here to initialize. And these are initialize options for this primitive. What that basically means is, for example, the X size along the X axis, you can kind of squish that down to like 50% or 25% or keep it at 100. You can also do coverage. So if you want to do a little Pac-Man face, here's 360 degrees, so 360. You can rotate that around to 180, 90, 35, whatever you want to do. H divides, these are horizontal divides, and you can crank those up or down if you want less resolution or more resolution. And of course, we'll get into resolution more as we go. And then vertical divides, these are your vertical divides. So I'm going to kind of just pick some settings. It doesn't really matter right now. And we're clicking in the document. We're kind of navigating. So here's our sphere, and as we're clicking and dragging in a document, we're not making new versions of the sphere. We're actually tumbling around the sphere. And that's pretty cool. But let's say we want to start sculpting on the sphere. If we touch the sphere, it's going to yell at us. It's going to tell us something. So every once in a while, you're going to try and do something in ZBrush, and it's going to say, hey, you can't do that right now. Here's why. So go ahead and read it. To enable sculpting, please convert this 3D primitive. So we took it out of the tool palette as a 3D mesh primitive. If you actually look at the name over here, you're going to see it's sphere 3D _1. This is a sphere 3D, first one you've dragged out. But don't get caught up in that yet. It'll, as we go, these things will make more sense, I promise. So you need to convert this 3D primitive to a Polymesh 3D by pressing the Make Polymesh 3D button in the tool palette. Now, so we know what most of this is already. These are our palettes. So we have a tool, and these are basically menus that we can dock, and we'll get to that in a second. So we have a material palette over here, and over here by default is your tool palette. So at the top of the tool palette, we're going to have a Make Polymesh 3D button. So in order to sculpt on this, we need to press that button. So I'm going to tap off that just to get rid of that menu. And I'm going to tap again just to, if it keeps yelling at you, just tap until it stops yelling at you. So now we're in the tool menu. I'm going to tap anywhere in this gray area and scroll up, just pull down, and you're going to see a Make Polymesh 3D button. So all I need to do is click that, and that converted it. So here's where it was named a Sphere 3D 1. It is now a Make Polymesh, it's a Polymesh PM 3D Sphere 3D. You're also going to see it's changed color. That means it has a poly group assigned. We'll get to that in a minute. Don't worry too much about that. So we have polyframe turned on, and now when we click and drag on our object, we can sculpt on that. I know that seems like kind of a lot just to kind of get into ZBrush and start sculpting. It's like, well, why do I need to know all this stuff? It'll make more sense when you start dealing with initializing primitives versus bringing in your own objects to sculpt on. Those are going to be two different things. But for now, just keep in mind that when you start over here in the tool palette and you're starting with a primitive, you're going to need to tell ZBrush, hey, these are the options I want. And if you want to, you can just grab a primitive, hit Make Polymesh 3D, start sculpting. You don't have to go down here and initialize. If you do, here's where you can do that. And it's important because as soon as you hit this Make Polymesh 3D button, you're going to see those initialize options change. This is no longer a primitive, this is a sculptable mesh. Those are two different things. You start with a primitive, you initialize it with primitive options, H divides, V divides, coverage, or a lot of other things once you get into the other primitives. And then once you convert it, you can now sculpt on it, and a lot more things are available to you, which we'll get into over time. But these initialize options are actually for ZModeler, so they've changed because this is a Polymesh 3D primitive initialize, not a primitive initialize. So again, just the basics. You drag out a primitive. If you want to sculpt on it, hit Make Polymesh 3D, start sculpting. So all of these words I've said up to this point is basically just to say that. So let's do it again. In order to do it again, so we're in edit mode and we can rotate around and we can sculpt on our object. I'm going to go out of edit mode. You can hit T. I'm going to hit Control N, clear my canvas, and let's grab another primitive just for fun. So this is our tool palette. I know it has a preview of the tool that we were just sculpting on. All that means is that tool is still selected. If I want to, I can drag that tool out again, and because I'm not in edit mode, I can keep dragging out versions of it if I'd like. But of course, I don't want to do that. I want to choose another primitive. So I'm going to click on this palette, and so we did a sphere. Let's just go down the line. Cube. I'm going to drag out a cube primitive, and I'm going to go into edit mode. So now I can tumble around this cube. So it's basically a polarized version of this cube with polygons on the side that are dictated by, if I go over here to initialize, because this is a cube 3D, it's not a polymesh primitive yet, I have these initialize options. So again, we can do X size, Y, Z size, sides count. You can crank it up. You can, oh, it's not a cube anymore, it's actually a cylinder. As well as, let's go and change that back to 4. And by the way, if you click in here, it'll turn the number red. You can hit number and enter, and that'll update the ZBrush count. You can do H divides. You can crank those H divides up, V divides. You can actually even twist your object, which comes in handy sometimes. Once you're happy with your cube and you want to sculpt on it, again, if you click on it, it's going to yell at you. You have to make Polymesh3D. So you're a primitive. You've got primitive initialize. Go ahead and hit make Polymesh3D. Now it's a sculptable polymesh object. Now you can go over here, and because we have standard brush by default selected, that means we can now sculpt on our object. So now this is a Polymesh 3D object. Now we still have polyframe turned on. If you want to turn that off, you can go ahead and turn that off. And now it looks like we've got kind of a waxy, matcap red wax actually, object that we can use our standard brush and kind of sculpt on.